Hi everybody, Grandad here again. What am I up to today? Well, today I'm going to tell you about this book. Now, this book I've had a long time. In fact, I bought it in 1986 and I still have the receipt in here for it. And as you can see, it's hopefully you can see that. I bought the book and it actually cost me £15 back in 1986. So it's quite an expensive purchase for me because I don't buy a lot of books. But the book is quite interesting. It's a book on Shropshire, where I live, and it's got a lot of ancient history in it, and a lot of things which I find quite interesting. Now, the book, as you'll see, if I bring it in close, I don't know whether you can see that on camera. There we go. It's a book by Henry Hudson and it's called Wild Humphrey Kynaston. Now, Wild Humphrey Kynaston was a highway robber back in the 1500s. But and this book tells a story, a fictional story, but it has a lot of details in it which are true. Now, Wild Humphrey was a strange sort of a character. He was son of a wealthy family. In fact, he lived in a castle at Middle, which is a little village not far from where I live. And he was from a well-to-do family, and he inherited his father's estate. But he was a bit of a wastrel in some ways, and he did a lot of carousing and partying and having a good time. And gradually, over the period of time, he spent all his money and got into debt. And as a result of that, he was found that he needed to get into a lot of bad company, and he was supposedly involved in a murder, and as a result of that he was outlawed, which meant he couldn't earn an honest living, and all his lands and various bits of his castle and whatever was left in his inheritance was taken by the crown, and he was left destitute. Now, he took to highway robbery apparently, and he used to hide out in a cave at Nestcliff, which is again not far from where I live. And apparently he lived there, and he's got a reputation for being a bit like Robin Hood, robbing the rich and giving to the poor, for which they helped to protect him from the authorities. Now, I don't know how true that is. From what I can gather, people who were outlawed, I don't know as they ever gave any of their money to the poor if they robbed anybody. I think they just robbed anybody, kept it for themselves. I don't know how true that is, but it's certainly a legend grew up around Wild Humphrey, and he's got up to various escapades, escaping from authorities, and he got into folklore, and it turned him into quite a well-known character in Shropshire. Now, what I'm hoping to do as part of this little book review that I'm doing is to visit Kinisons Cave at Nestcliff as a little field trip, and if I manage to do that later on in the summer, I'll add it to this video so that you'll be able to see the actual cave which they said Wild Humphrey lived in, and the area in which he lived and roamed. And I'm hoping that you know, some remains still there. I mean, it's been taken over by the wildlife people now, and I think they've put fences and gates up and all sorts of things, so it's not easy to get into the cave where he supposedly lived with his horse, Beelzebub. And this horse had some remarkable remarkable feats of escape. And he was able to escape on this horse because it was so well trained that it would do virtually anything he asked it to do, and he had some remarkable escapes. Probably one of the most famous escapes that he made was the sheriff heard of Wild Humphrey travelling the roads, and he understood that he was going to be passing through a place called Milford Bridge, where I actually lived. And it's quite a wide part of the river, and the bridge that's there now isn't the original bridge. It was a much more rickety wooden bridge back in the day, and you were able to the constable decided that he'd lie in wait at the entrance to the bridge and take out the planks that formed part of the bridge, because it was just loose wooden planks going across, and they took out a section of the planks thinking that when he rode onto the bridge they'd jump out and capture him and he wouldn't be able to go forward because of the gap that they'd made in the planking, and apparently instead of being captured, he just spurred his horse and the horse leapt the gap, and for years the gap was measured out on Thornton Heath as Kynaston's Leap, because apparently it was a tremendous amount of distance that they pulled out of these planks, and the horse managed to bound away, and Wild Humphrey escaped yet again. He escaped it another time by jumping off a bridge in Shrewsbury when they were trying to capture him, and the horse jumped over the parapet into the river and swam down the river and escaped that way. But what's in this book is this book was written, and it's over 200 years old. I think it's 217 years old. It was actually written in 1899. It was printed, and it's quite interesting. But photography must have been in its early days, because books of this age, usually the illustrations are just paintings or drawings and things like that. But this book has actually got photographs, which I was quite impressed with. You know, for such an old book to have printed photographs taken. And what I was going to do for this video was go through the pictures in this book, the illustrations, and then when we go out on our field trip we might be able to find these places, and I'll be able to show them on video exactly what they look like today. There's some other little bits and pieces in here which is quite interesting, which of local history, which is quite useful to know. So what I'll do, I'll go through the photographs one at a time. It won't take up too much time. I think there's about 10 of them or something like that, and show them on camera so that you'll get to see some of the places that this book covers. And it's a very interesting story. I mean, if ever you get a chance, I don't know whether you'd ever be able to buy this book, but I got it by chance. I asked a bookseller to look out for it, and he managed to find me a copy. I've only ever seen 2 copies. One was very badly damaged and a lot of pictures missing, which a neighbour lent me, which has got me interested in it. And then I asked a book firm to see it, a second-hand book firm, to look out for it, and they managed to find me this one. It is complete, and it's rather interesting. It's actually signed by one of the patrons of the book in the front here, and it was actually given by a chap by the name of Lord Colonel Thornycroft. And this is actually dated on the front cover here in ink. You can see that been written. I don't know whether you can see it. I hope you can. But it was dedicated to Colonel Thornycroft in 1901. Now that date's quite significant to me, because my father was actually born in 1901, and at this time, when this book was presumably being written and distributed, my grandparents actually lived in Shrewsbury, and they had a public house. They just moved back from Shrewsbury, from a place called Abergavenny, where they worked in a public house there, and they moved back to Shrewsbury to live in a public house. Now, the interesting part about that is they moved to this public house in Shrewsbury. Now, my granddad was a bit of a strange character. He had all sorts of hobbies, and one of his hobbies was training birds, capturing wild birds, which you wouldn't be allowed to do today, but in them days it didn't matter. And he used to capture birds, and one of these birds he taught to talk. And it was pretty remarkable. People didn't believe that you could make a bird talk, but he had this talking bird. Now, I'm not sure what kind of a bird it was. I thought it was a jackdaw, but it may have been some other kind of foreign bird. I'm not sure. But and it was interesting that during this time, he must have been back in Shrewsbury when my father was born in 1901, because he was born in Shrewsbury. So about the time that this book was being written, my father actually, grandfather, actually was in Shrewsbury with a talking bird, and that'll come significant when I start showing you through the book. Now, if we go to the first book cover, first picture in this book, which I want to show you, is the chap who wrote it, Henry Hudson. And there's a picture of him. Well, I've already shown you this, I don't know. But there's a picture of Henry Hudson, and at the bottom he's got a little dedication and his signature. Now, I don't know whether that's genuine or not, or whether it's part of the print, but it's interesting that he actually got his signature on there. And it's a photograph, so it's a pretty good likeness of what he actually looked like. Now, if we go on to the next picture in the book, in Shrewsbury there's a castle, and it was involved with the Battle of Shrewsbury, and this book covers a little bit about the Battle of Shrewsbury in the story. It relates to it. Obviously the Battle of Shrewsbury was many years before, but for whatever reason in this story it does something about the Norman stronghold of Shrewsbury Castle. And this other little picture, with the first picture in here, is a picture of a gate at Shrewsbury Castle. Now, I visited Shrewsbury Castle, but I never saw that gate. I don't know where it is, and it's quite interesting. It may be what they call Traitor's Gate, where people were let into the castle through the Traitor's Gate. And I don't know how many pictures you'd ever find of Shrewsbury Castle 200 years ago, but that's one. Now the next picture, relating again to the castle and the Battle of Shrewsbury, and this one's entitled A Skirmish at the Gate. That relates again to the Battle of Shrewsbury, I think. If I bring that forward, you can see it's a picture of people fighting, and the castle in the background. And that's another little part that's wove into this story of Shrewsbury. Now, the Battle of Shrewsbury was fought at a time when a fellow by the name of Owen Glendower was about, a Welsh rebel who was fighting in Wales. And apparently when the Battle of Shrewsbury was taking place, Owen Glendower was coming to help on one side or the other. I don't quite know which side, but he was on the side, and it said that he looked over at the battle scene from a tree on the other side of the river. Now, this tree was pretty remarkable. It was a huge tree and very old, and at one time there's a place in Shrewsbury called the Oak, and it's where this tree apparently was, because of course the tree itself is gone now. Now, I've never seen a picture of the tree, but in this book there is one. And it says Glendower's Oak at Shelton, which is the area where the tree was. Now I'll show you this tree, and you can see it's quite a huge tree. If I bring it in a little bit closer, I don't know whether you can see, but there's people standing by the side of that tree, give you some idea how big it was. Now apparently you could get about 12 or so people inside this tree, because it was hollow, and it was held together with iron bands and stuff like that. And it was pretty remarkable. I think there is still a tree there in the grounds of where it is, but I don't know as anyone's ever had a photograph of it. But I see here the tree is 34 feet 6 inches in circumference at the shoulder height, and the base measures 44 feet 6 inches. So it's a pretty big tree, and very interesting, and I've never seen a photograph of it except that one in this book. Now if we go on a little bit further, I told you that one of the times when Wild Humphrey managed to avoid justice, he jumped off a bridge into the river. Now this is a photograph. I don't know whether the Welsh bridge in Shrewsbury that's there now is a more modern bridge, and the original bridge into Shrewsbury was much older and a little bit further down the river. But this picture, which I've actually taken another picture, slightly bigger, so I'll bring that one up. And if you have a look at that, you can see a picture of the old Welsh bridge in Shrewsbury before it was demolished. That's what it would have looked like. And there's a little character diving in off the bridge, which is supposed to be Wild Humphrey escaping once again from the authorities. The other thing you can see on this picture, there's some ships. Now, the River Severn is not very good for ships these days. There's various weirs and shallows and goodness knows what. But trows used to come up. Those boats that you can see there are called trows, and they used to travel up and down the river and bring cargo. So the river was quite navigable in the old days. And so that makes it quite interesting. That's a painting. It isn't a photograph. Now, if we go on a little bit further through the book, there's another to the next plate. Now, we've actually now come to the part which I'm hoping to do a video of Kinisons Cave. Now, this photograph shows the cave as it was in the 1900s, and this is the entrance to the cave, and it's quite elaborate. It's been carved out and looks like I mean, it doesn't look much like a highwayman's hideout to me, but this is well up on the top of the rocks. This is the doorway, showing the doorway of the cave. Now, as I say, legend has it that Wild Humphrey hid in this cave and lived there. And this next photograph is a picture, and it's not terribly good, but it does show you the inside of the cave. And it just looks not terribly good, I must admit. But what it does show you there is, which you may not be able to see on the film, is the actual initials carved. It says HK 1564, carved into the rock inside the cave. It only consisted of sort of 2 rooms, one of which they say Humphrey lived in, and it had a fireplace and a window, and the other one where his horse was supposed to be able to get to it, up these stone steps, which is pretty remarkable. If he did manage to get a horse to climb up a mountain like that, up a staircase and into a cave, I don't know whether that's true, but pretty remarkable horse if he did. Now, another part of the story relates to a witch's well. Now, I've searched for this well and I've never found it, but there's a photograph of it here, and I'll show you that as well. Now, apparently it's a natural spring that comes out, and people used to go and bathe in the water because maybe it had magical or mystical properties, and they built a little building by the side of it. Now, I don't know whether that still exists. I've never been able to find it, but I may go searching for that one day and see if I can actually find out if that well still exists. Incidentally, if you look on these photographs as I show you, you'll see there are people on there, and almost certainly that's Henry Hudson and his family going around looking at these various places. And had the photographs taken, and he actually was is photographed himself. It's sort of an ancient selfie, which I find rather interesting, that he managed to put himself in most of the pictures in here. Now, this is another part of the story which relates to Milford Hall, which is now used as a farmhouse, and that probably still exists. And I'll just show you that one as well. That's quite an interesting picture of a building at Milford Hall, and that's woven into the story. Let's go on again and have another little look. This is another picture. As I said, there was part of the story was Wild Humphrey supposedly involved in a murder, and this is a picture of where the murder was supposed to have taken place. Now, this is a picture again on Nestcliff Hill of the stone quarry, and it says the stone quarry from the hidden alcove, which is part of the story. And again, you can see on this picture, I don't know whether you'll be able to see it, but there's a gentleman that stood at the bottom there in the trees at the bottom of that big cliff, and that's almost certainly Henry Hudson once again getting in on the picture. And there's another, perhaps a better photograph of it there, and again Henry Hudson and his lady companion in the bottom of this picture. Shows the cliff at Nestcliff. I don't think it looks a lot like that now. It makes it look really high there and very dangerous. But this was a stone quarry where the stone was mined for building houses, and a lot of houses in Nestcliff and around about are built from sandstone from that quarry. And if you look, I don't know whether you can see it on this picture, I hope you can, but in the corner, if you take a screenshot of this and then be able to enlarge it somehow, you might be able to see that just in the corner here where the lady is, there's a crane, sort of a wooden gantry type crane. And now, when I visited there as a boy, many years ago, there was a huge hole. So not only did the cliff go up, it actually went down, where they'd carved down into the rock to dig out sandstone blocks, and they hoisted them to the surface by that little crane, which in the 1900s was still actually there, and I can see it in the picture there. So there was some remnants of it when I went, but nothing like that. Now, Wild Humphrey actually lived his stately home, or his fortified castle, where he lived when he was a younger boy before he got into being an outlaw, was Middle Castle. And so I don't know why, but in this story they put some pictures, and this is another castle. I think there's a picture of Middle Castle in a minute, but I'll show you that. But this is another castle, and this is at Troodon. It's not far away from there, but I just thought I'd put this one in as well, because although I don't know a great deal about Troodon Castle, I don't think there's a lot of it left, but that's a picture of Trollodon Castle. And that's an interesting place to visit. I may go and visit there and see whether those remains are still there and still very good. Now let's have a look. We've got another picture here. What's this one on? Ah, this is what I thought I was going to show you then when I was talking about. This is the ruins of Middle Castle. Now, Middle, now I've seen on videos and looking it up, that it's actually very ruinous, and there's very little there, and it's been turned into a farm, and it's not easy to get to. But when this book was published, they managed to get a picture. Now, this isn't actually a photograph, it's a drawing, but it does say Ruins of Middle Castle in Trollope. And if I just show you that, this is supposed to be the castle which Wild Humphrey, or a more fortified house which Wild Humphrey lived in as a boy, and this is where all his money, he didn't lavish any money on the castle, it fell into ruins and he squandered his money. Now there's one more picture here I've marked. That's all the pictures. Oh, this is another picture. Apparently Kinisons Cave was lived in by a troglodyte, or somebody, a woman who was supposed to have lived there back in the day, and if you paid her a few pennies she'd tell you the story of Wild Humphrey Kynaston, if you visited there, to earn herself a little bit of money. And this is another photograph of the cave, but I think somehow they've enhanced it by putting a drawing of a woman stood in the doorway. Now I don't think that's a genuine photograph, because I can't believe that you know, it doesn't look quite right. So I think the woman in that picture has been put into the photograph. The photograph, the actual cave looks like a proper photograph, but the actual woman that is portrayed in that picture looks like a drawing to me. It doesn't look real. Now remember I was telling you a little bit further back in the story where there was tell of a talking bird. Now in this story there's also an instance of a talking bird, and they've sort of wove it into the story that this witch that was living in a cottage somewhere that got involved with Wild Humphrey in his story in this book, and she had a talking bird, and the author must have thought that people wouldn't have believed that you could have a bird that can talk. So what he did, at the bottom of this particular page there's a footnote written by the author, and as you read the story it directs you to this footnote at the bottom of the page that's been printed, and this tells of you know, the fact that there was a talking, I mean they say it's a cockatoo, but I don't know whether it was. It said, "This cockatoo may be deemed far-fetched, but at the time of writing we know of a bird in Shrewsbury which not only uttered these very expressions, but a host of others remarkable phrases, and acted generally in a manner characteristic, and impressed one at the idea of reason rather than instinct." So that's interesting, that in about the 1900s, the author of this book actually visited somewhere in Shrewsbury, a public house presumably, where they had a talking bird. Now I know that my grandfather had a talking bird, and round about the same time. So this actually might be, the author may well have seen my grandfather's talking bird and included it in his book. Now whether that's true or not I don't know, but I find it interesting that around about a coincidence, I wouldn't have thought there was many public houses that had talking birds back in the day. So it might be the very same bird, my granddad's talking bird, that was featured as part of this story of Wild Humphrey Kynaston. Now as I say, I'm hoping to do a field trip and go and see some of the places mentioned in this book. I mean, it's quite a difficult book to read, this. It's written in sort of an Old English sort of language, so, and I'm not a great reader, I must tell you. But I have read the book, I read the story, and it's quite an interesting story, and I think it would make a good film. I mean, if ever Spielberg or somebody like that wants a hero and a villain and a love story to write someone to write a story about. I mean, I think it would probably be better than the Titanic, to be honest. I think this would make a great film. I mean, Henry Hudson. I don't know whether he wrote a lot of books, but certainly, if you want to make a film about a highwayman, the great Robin Hood of Shropshire, you couldn't go far wrong than follow this book and write a story and make a film round about it, and I think it'd be quite good. So until I make the field trip, and I show you what I see there, see what the remains of Wild Humphrey, I'll have to break off now. And if I manage to do this trip to Kinisons Cave and show you what remains are there now, I will. So until the next time, or until I finish off this video, I'll see you now. Bye.